Hey everyone, it is time. We are ready for the top 10 of my top 100 board games of all time, 2021 edition. Thank you everybody who has joined me for all these different videos. I hope that it's been a fun time. I've had a lot of fun with it myself, and I have here the last 10 to go on this list. But before I get to that, we have today's drink. And today's drink is actually a weird one. And that is a weird color for a drink. So I decided that instead of picking one of the bitters that I've already had, already done, already used, it'd be more fun to do something different. This is still kind of an old-fashioned, but only kind of. That is gin with simple syrup and mint bitters. So what's really coloring that right now is the minty green bitters. And I had no idea how it was going to turn out, honestly, because I've never used mint bitters before or anything. I just got them recently. I figured gin would probably be the best thing I could use it with, and I'm pleased with the results because this is it's a juniper gin, so it has a little bit more of that piney forward taste, and that piney mixed with this nice minty really works well. But let's without further ado talk about this section of the list. Okay, we'll get to the list here in a second. There are no new games. As in, no games that were not on the list previously have made it into the top 10. Some have moved up. There's one that has moved up a total of 29 spots. And some have moved down a little bit. One moved down a total of 8 spots. And Nosferatu Clown, if you are watching, there's only one roll and write game on the top 10. So, let's get started. At number 10, we have Blood Rage. Blood Rage actually was number 2 last year and had held the number 2 position for a couple of years. I think the whole time I've done the list, and it's dropped. Some of this is I just haven't played it as much recently, though I do have it sitting right back here. And the last time I played it, I taught it to some new people. It was fun, but I think it just didn't land quite as well that time. Some of it was I've normally played it at 2, which I know people don't love it at 2, but I kind of like it at 2 or 3, where you can really draft towards a specific strategy. I think probably I prefer Blood Rage at 3. We were playing with 4, and 4 wasn't bad at all with just everybody on the board. It changes it up, and I think that's one of the things about this game that I like is it's different every time you play it, but also it really does change it up every time you play it. And with more people, it's just a little bit more random. Not a bad thing, but enough to push it down to number 10. Number 10, obviously, out of a top 100 list and out of ranking 267 different games, is not bad at all. I still really like the game. I still am really glad I have it in my collection and I want to play it more. But it just dropped a little bit from that last play. And this, I really need to talk about what this game is. This is an area control drafting, action point driven game that has some amazing minis. This is the first of the Eric Lane trilogy of games, which has Blood Rage, Rising Sun, and now most recently Ankh. And this is the only one I've played out of that group. I almost backed Ankh I almost still wish I did, but it's one that I want to try before I buy it, because while I like area control, and I mean Blood Rage definitely has area control to it, I really like the drafting aspect of Blood Rage that allows you to set up your board and your strategy more so. There's a really broken strategy that if you allow somebody to draft it, it's basically, well, it's the Loki strategy, where you can kill off your characters, send them to Valhalla, you get points when they die, you get points when you get them back from Valhalla, and it's just a weird way to try and win the game. But it's fun that you can have a lot of different strategies. You can try and get as many points as possible from winning battles, or you can try and complete quests to get points. It's just a really good game with some fun monster minis, and apparently there's a sequel or a 2.0 version of Blood Rage in the works with Eric Lang and Simon, but we'll have to see what comes from that. Next up, we have, and this is the one that moved up the most, from 38 all the way to number 9. It's also the only roll and write on this chunk of the list. And if you heard me talk about roll and writes before, or write about them on nerdologist.com, you'll know that my preferred roll and write is Cartographers. This one works really well for me for a few different reasons. The first being that there is some interaction. Now, there are some others where there's kind of interaction, such as Ganchan Clever, where the dice that I take limit the dice that you have available to you. Same with Cat Cafe. But with Cartographers, there's a whole lot more, because so you're building out maps, and sometimes on the maps you mark where the monsters are. But you don't mark where the monsters are. Whoever you're playing with marks where the monsters are on your board, and they're trying to put it in the least ideal location, something that's going to break up future scoring for you, because they want to basically give you negative points. So if you do not surround the monsters, every open cube or open square is worth -1 point. So later in the game, if you have, say, gotten 3 monsters onto the board, you could be scoring a fair number of negative points. Plus, I just like this one because also the scoring in it is really good. The scoring for Cartographers goes A, B, B, C, C, D, D, A. Basically, for each season, you score 2 of the objectives. And so in spring, you score the first 2. Summer, you score the second and the third. And then back at winter, you score the 4th and the 1st. So you can really kind of do well if you focus your building right. Though you always have to consider where you're putting your points into, or maybe with a little bit of bad luck, the wrong things are flipped and now you don't score really any points because of the fact that, well, it just doesn't work for the season. You get down to the end of it, if you don't flip the right cards and haven't set yourself up already to score winter and spring, or not winter and spring, but 4 and 1, or D and A, then you're going to struggle because there's nothing you can do to really improve your position. There are some other ways to score points in here as well. Getting coins is a consistent way to get points, but it's also a consistent way to get potentially less points. If you can get a lot of coins that first round, that could be a lot of points. But future rounds, it's a diminishing return. Down from number 3 last year, So another fairly big drop, even though I continue to pick up everything for this game. We have the one living card game that I'm very heavily invested into, and that is going to be the one with the Marvel theme, Marvel Champions. I still really love Marvel Champions because of the fact that it feels like you're playing superheroes. That's my issue and why Marvel Legendary doesn't make the list, because it doesn't feel like I'm playing a superhero. It's deck building. It's something that I should like. But that one, I'm throwing together a random team of characters hoping to create a synergy. Whereas Marvel Champions, you play as a single hero. I mean, I have waiting to get put into their boxes the Hood scenario pack, so a villain to fight against. I have a couple of heroes. And when I play as Nebula, I play as Nebula. I don't feel like I'm mixing together two different things, which I do when I play Marvel Legendary. And this game also ramps really well. So you pre-build your deck. You're not building your deck in the midst of everything. You're building your deck ahead of time to optimally use your character. And you can swap them out with different kind of aspects, different kind of focuses on what they do. So I might decide to play War Machine as Justice and Nebula as Aggression, or I could flip that. I really have the choice of how I want to build my own deck of cards there. And you can change that up in between every game. So like the Hood scenario pack is just going to be a one-off game that I can play. Though I do have the Mad Titan's Shadow, and that one is going to be a campaign. So I would continue with the same group of characters throughout it. The game just, like I said, it's a lot of fun. It's one that I need to play more of to justify why I have everything that I do. But it's also one, because it's a Marvel theme, I just like to have all of it as well. Plus, it does one thing I like a lot. So previously I've done a playthrough where it was Spider-Man versus Rhino. Basically the opening scenario they expect you to go with. And Spider-Man has his two sides of his card. We have Peter Parker and we have Spider-Man. When it's on the Peter Parker side, well, Rhino, not knowing who Peter Parker is, not knowing that he's Spider-Man, is going to spend all his time and energy scheming. But the second that it flips over and it's Spider-Man, now Rhino is going to be fighting Spider-Man, attacking him, taking his health down, and the scheme is going to become secondary. So flipping back and forth between that alter ego and the hero side is a huge part of the game that is just a lot of fun and really clever. Then we have, down from number 5, a big Fantasy Flight game. And this is part of their Arkham world. So, I mean, we just went from one Fantasy Flight game in Marvel Champions to another. This is the app-assisted one in Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. In Mansions of Madness, you are an explorer, or not explorer, investigator. And you are trying to solve whatever the scenario is. Sometimes you might be going around a town. Sometimes you might be exploring a mansion. And the app helps set up points of interest and keep those hidden, helps place monsters onto the board. It's kind of a surprise and can give you puzzles to solve, stuff that really isn't possible if everybody's going to be playing the same game. That was the issue I've heard with Mansions of Madness, the original edition, is that one person had to be in charge of the game. They had to be in charge of setting up those points of interest. And I know for some people, they don't love the idea of apps in their game. This is one, from what I know, that the app improves the game considerably. Because now everybody is playing the same game. There's nothing wrong with a one versus all game. There are some very good ones out there. I have, though it may be leaving my collection soon just because I don't know when I'm going to play it, I have Star Wars Imperial Assault, and that one can have one person playing the Empire kind of running a scenario and campaign for everybody else. But there's also an app for that, and I'd probably prefer to play it with the app, well, because I don't know that I'm going to get a group to play it with. And that's some of the reason why it might be leaving my collection, is that's a game that I could play solo, but there's just enough housekeeping playing solo that I'd prefer to play with somebody else, but I'm not sure who or when I'd get it to the table. But that's not relevant for Mansions of Madness, because Mansions of Madness is solid solo, and I know people who would want to play it because it's one-off scenarios. And in Mansions of Madness, too, you can play a scenario multiple times, and it will change slightly how the map of the mansion gets set up. Where the rooms are that you need to go to are going to change because it can do that as an app. It doesn't have to have that fixed setup, which is really nice. Next up at number 6, moving all the way up from number 24, we have a deck building game. And I've talked a lot about how I like deck building games because, I mean, honestly, they're one of my favorite ones to use out there because there's just something about building up your own combos of things that's really enjoyable. And my number 6 deck building game, and the highest one on the list, is going to be Aeon's End. Now, I previously had Aeon's End Legacy. That one was at number 28. I put Aeon's End higher because it's a higher challenge. I have the ability to play against whatever nemesis I choose, whenever I want, with whatever breach mages I want. And I have a lot of it. I have 5 boxes, plus a small expansion box, that I need to condense down into, right now probably ideally 3 boxes, and eventually down into 2 boxes once I get the next legacy version of the game, because that should probably be arriving sometime early next year. But I like this one even though it has a fixed market. Now, fixed markets are not a deal breaker for me. I talk about how I prefer a non-fixed market, like something in Clank and Space or Ascension, than I do the fixed market in Dominion. Because in Dominion, you're working competitively against each other. And with a fixed market, the person who can look at the market and optimize it the best is going to win. In Aeon's End, you're working cooperatively together. And it's just more fun to work together with a fixed market. Xenoshift also has a fixed market, and I really like that game because we can work together. We can collaborate and decide, okay, these pieces, these cards are going to be more beneficial to you than they are to me. So you start to collect those, I'll collect these, and we can really focus in on a strategy. Versus, like I said, with Dominion, the person who figures out the puzzle of the fixed market fastest wins. And I mean, Aeon's End is another one where I will never be short of content. I'm not going to say everything for it, because I think there are some promos that I do not have for it. I don't care. I have all the big boxes and all the small box expansions, and that's plenty of content to keep me going probably forever. In fact, it may be the next thing I stream is going back to Aeon Zen. It's because Aeon Zen Legacy kind of introduced these chapters that you go through, and then you got to create a Breach Mage as you went. I believe the following two big box expansions, the New Age and Outcasts, I think both of those give you chapters that you can play through. It's scenario based, more so than anything. It's not a legacy game at that point. They just hide some of the information from you so you can play through it. And I mean, I feel like that'd actually be a lot of fun to get to the table and stream again. And I feel like it worked pretty well on stream last time. I could also start to bust out Marvel Champions and stream that some more. At number 5, we have one that moved all the way up from number 11, and that was even without getting played this year. But it's a game that I just really love, and it's a game that has you being unique characters with special powers from the beginning and more as you go on, as you build temples, as you build up different monuments, and try to win in a number of different ways. So in Lords of Hellas, you are competing to be the first to reach one of 4, I believe, victory conditions. You can either control 2 large land areas, and those are split into smaller land areas, and you have to control all the smaller ones in the large one at the end of your turn to be able to win. And in 2 of them, so that's a fairly tricky way to win. Then you can defeat 3 monsters, and monsters are tricky to defeat. Because you need to get specific symbols on specific spots to deal the damage to them. Then you could control 5 temples, or after a monument has been built, and these monuments are gorgeous and in multiple pieces, so you put them together. If you control it at the end of 3 turns, then you win the game. Or the person who controls it at the end of 3 turns. So once that final monument is built, the end game is triggered. Everybody has to rush down to that one spot. But what I like about the game, besides all of that, and there are some flaws, like the rulebook's a little bit iffy. There are quests you can go on, but they're not really worth it. They give you some reward, but not good enough rewards for the amount of effort it takes. But I love the mechanics of this game. This is from Awaken Realms. Awaken Realms does some games that I absolutely adore. And whenever they put something out on GameFound or on Kickstarter originally, GameFound now, I really am going to check it out. So they recently did Lords of Ragnarok, the kind of sequel to Lords of Hellas, which had some different mechanics, not a ton, but I actually didn't end up backing it, even though I love Vikings, just because I have Lords of Hellas and I don't know that I need both. And the Lords of Hellas stuff I have is Sundropped, which is their kind of painting of it in a way to just give it more character. And I wasn't going to pay for that for Lords of Ragnarok because that's not cheap. And I picked up my stuff used, so it just seemed like a good deal. So stick with it. And it just is, like I keep on saying, it's a lot of fun. I have played it at 5. I would not recommend playing it at 5. Now, 5 was not horrible, but 5 people learning the game all at once is a lot. I'd play 5 players again if one person was learning the game. But I want to try it at 3 or 4 and really dive into it some more, because I think it could be so much fun. And like I said, I love the powers and abilities. And at the end of it, the game, when we ended, I was 1 turn away from winning. 2 other people were 1 turn away from winning. There was the person who won, and then the 5th player was 2 turns away from winning. And we all were adjusting and changing our strategies as we went, and such a good game. And number 5, up 1 spot from number 6, is Detective, a modern crime board game. Most recently, for this game, I have played this Dig Deeper little one-off case. But let me say this. Detective as a game is amazing. It's number 4 on my list for a reason. This is a procedural cop drama in a box. You get to play the cops. Now, I know for some people, NCIS, CSI, those shows are exceedingly boring. I've watched a lot of NCIS, very little CSI, and at this point in time, I don't want to watch any of those shows ever again. I'm done with the procedural cop drama. NCIS worked because of some of the characters. For me, not because of the procedure it had. Detective, a modern crime board game, takes that and makes it fun. It's kind of like I always say with Small World. Small World is risk, but fun. Detective is like watching one of those shows, but fun, and you get to be the detective. And there's just not quite enough time to figure everything out. And like that Dig Deeper expansion or that one-off case was so much fun, but this base box is so good because it is 5 cases that are all connected together. You are figuring out this big picture as you go along, and by case 3 you might think you have a good idea of what's going on, and you might, but then there might be more twists and turns to kind of uncover as you go. Also, this game works well on Zoom because there's multiple things that people need to do. There's the Antares database, which isn't Antares anymore. I forget the location online where it is, where you can look stuff up. You can collect your data and like your fingerprints and clues and blood samples and stuff like that to help you solve the case. That's where it's going to have like interrogations that happen and stuff like that. In this main box, the one that I have the cover up for, there are also then things you can look up online. There are real world events that are tied into this board game. And finally, then one person, and we played 3-player when we did it online. One person, myself, who had the game, I would read through the cards. I would tell people what were our options, where we could go next. And I mean, we had pages upon pages of notes each. I probably had 5 or 6 sheets of paper completely full on both sides. One person had a notepad document that who knows how long that was. Somebody else had like a notebook of sheets about that size and probably had 7 or 8 pages of them full, just to try and figure out what's going on between all the cases. And it's so good. It's so much fun. And there's a 70s spy one. There's more one-off cases. There's what I'm really excited for now. I'm gonna pull out only the envelope here. This is Dune House of Secrets. It is using the same system, and it's for Dune. Plus, if you pre-order, get nice pieces. And the idea of taking this system and being able to play a Dune game with it is so exciting for me. I'm ready to dive into that one whenever I can, but I can't right now because I'm going through another big campaign with the people who I play detective with. And we're only on campaign 2 of 3 for that one, and not that far into it. That's going to be Tainted Grail. And this is for Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon. I have only played the whole way through Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon. There's also The Last Night and Age of Legends. We're playing through The Last Night right now, and then we'll have Age of Legends to go through. But each campaign is about 50 hours worth of play. And this game is brutal. So there's rules at the end of how to play story mode. I highly recommend you do that. Story mode is still tough, but it's not going to kill you super easily. And with story mode, with this game, I shouldn't say with story mode. With this game, one of the great things is the story in it. This is the best writing. I think it's the best writing I've seen for any board game. Now, Detective and Modern Crime board game is up there, but that's much smaller. This is massive and expansive, and you're going across the island of Avalon, lighting these men here, interacting with characters, interacting with the Knights of the Round Table, whatever it might be. And there's just so much story in it. There's an amazing app for this one. Now, this is one, the app doesn't really assist you in making gameplay easier. The app is a nice add-on to the game and free, versus something like Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition, where you need to have the app. In Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, the app is just dialogue. This is there's a little bit beyond dialogue, but not much. And again, that it exists in another spot, so you do not need it. But it is somebody reading the narrative to you. It is immersive music playing in the background. It makes the experience, for me, that much better. It means that I don't have to stop, flip through a book, find the right passage, read it, and continue on. I now have somebody who's doing all that reading for me. I just have to punch in the location number, and they start to tell me what's going on and describe what's happening. I actually really like the combat and diplomacy in this game. Now, combat is much more important than diplomacy, in my opinion. Though the second campaign, I feel like diplomacy shows up more often, at least where we've gone thus far. But combat and diplomacy are all about chaining cards together. The more you can chain together in a useful way can potentially allow you to draw more cards, to even chain more cards together, or to do more damage, or to push yourself higher on that diplomacy track to be able to defeat these things. And this is probably the area where playing story mode makes the game that much easier. So story mode does one major thing. It treats it like you're playing with one less player. Yes, Dr. Glory had Tainted Grail, all the way up at number 3. But with story mode, so one less player means that with the men here, so men here basically are these things that light up areas of the land and keep the weirdness which would kill you off pushed back. And it gives you an extra day before you have to light it again, which is nice because there's definitely a crunch for resources. But I think for me, the bigger thing that one less person does is it keeps the monster level lower longer. And the monsters in Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, and the subsequent expansion campaigns are deadly. So the longer you have without them being as deadly, or the chances of them being as deadly is lower, that really makes a difference. And it really keeps you alive a whole lot longer. Though they introduce new things in the additional campaigns, and I'll talk about it here. They introduce exposure because Avalon has iced over or snowed over, and that definitely can kill you as well. Though story mode does one major thing to help with that. At number 2, and number 2 is probably, along with Cartographers, the biggest step away from kind of everything else in the top 10. The top 10, for the most part, with Blood Rage, Marvel Champions, Banshees of Madness, Aeon's End, Lords of Hellas, Detective, and Tainted Grail, those are all big games. There's a lot to them. There's a lot of depth to dive into with those games. Cartographers, not so much, though there is more strategy in that roll and write than probably any other that I can think of. Looking at my shelf here real quick. Yeah, that of what I've played, that's probably the most depth. Number 2 is not a ton of depth and was number 7 last year. And now I'm going to disagree with myself a little bit. There is depth to number 2 because each character that you can play as plays very differently. But it is primarily a game about rolling dice, trying to get the right combinations to deal damage to defeat your opponent. And that's going to be dice throwing. I absolutely love this game. This is probably in the top 5 to 10 games I've played all times, just in terms of number of plays. And yeah, I talked about that, Dr. Glory Hog, with how Cartographers, that player interaction does make it stand out in a really good way. And dice throwing, even though it's kind of Yahtzee-like in terms of what you're doing to attack, you're rolling dice up to 3 times, creating that right combination to deal damage, there's so much more than that. Each character plays so incredibly differently, from the barbarian, who's all about smashing and then kind of buffing up and healing themselves, to the shadow thief, who's going to be stealing and hoarding basically combat points. There's the gunslinger, whose defense is a duel. There's the tactician, who has all sorts of ways to manipulate things. There's the Trent, that has saplings and things that it grows up that it can use to heal up or to deal damage, or so many different things. I mean, one of my favorite characters in dice throwing is the Pyromancer. The Pyromancer has no defense. 0 defense. But every time you attack them and they roll their defensive dice, there's a chance they're going to do damage to you. There's a chance they're going to get more fire mastery. The more fire mastery they have, the more they can potentially deal damage to you. I recently just destroyed a Shadow Thief, who, in my opinion, is one of the stronger characters, with the Pyromancer, because the Shadow Thief was having trouble getting damage out, and when they did, it was smaller amounts, and I was able to basically return all of that. But there's so much fun in dice throwing. And on that cover, you can see 6 of the characters. There are 16 characters out there. You can mix and match and play whomever you want against whomever you want. And I mean, an hour ago, or no, like 2-3 hours ago, I just completed my Marvel dice throwing pledge. Paid for the shipping on that, and that's going to be coming, I think, well, they're projecting June. It sounds like most of it's done at this point, at least in terms of development. It's done. They already have like pre-production copies to review. So I expect it around June. But that's going to be another 8 characters and 8 Marvel heroes, which, I mean, we all kind of know I love Marvel, that I can play as. And I can play them against each other, or I can even mix them in. I can do the Barbarian fighting against Thor, or Doctor Strange or Scarlet Witch up against the Pyromancer. And dice throwing seems, in some ways, like it should be a 2-player game, 2-player head-to-head game. And it's amazing at 2-player head-to-head. But they also have a King of the Hill variant. And I don't like too much the 2-headed 2v2 sort of game. I get that kind of matches up with what you can do in Magic the Gathering. But King of the Hill is so much fun. Less health for everybody, so the game doesn't stretch out that much longer. And you get a card draw if you attack the person with the most life. And card draw is huge in this game because it allows you to manipulate your dice more. Or if it's something you really don't want to use, you can discard it, gain a combat point. And combat points, you need them to play those cards in your hand. So just a single card can make a huge difference in this game. King of the Hill is an absolute blast as well. So dice throwing, well, a lot of people might say it's best at 2, 3, 4-player King of the Hill. Still just so much fun. And finally, that takes us to number 1. My number 1 has been my number 1 since I started this list. I think I started back in 2018 was the first year. Maybe 2019, I forget. And my number 1 is the number 1 game on Board Game Geek. If you follow my content, I don't think this is a major surprise. Probably the least surprising pick out of everything, Gloomhaven. Yeah, there's no drum roll, please. Everybody knows what this one's going to be. But Gloomhaven is a massive, massive, massive game. Though, it's soon not to be the most massive game on my shelf. Well, I say soon, it's going to be a little bit, because I have Frosthaven coming, the sequel. I have Isofirian Guard. I'm not sure which other ones are going to be bigger in terms of weight, but both of those will be. Gloomhaven is a game where the box of stuff weighs over 20 pounds, which honestly is a bit ridiculous for a board game. There were 3 of us who played it, and I estimate that we were somewhere between 200 to 250 hours into the game. And not total between all the players, but per player. I paid $120, $130 for the game, plus shipping. Might be the best investment I've ever made in my life in terms of, well, second best investment. Best investment would be an engagement ring. That one definitely has the best return in terms of cost per hour value. But Gloomhaven, in terms of board games, it's not even close. The amount of time put into this game is so much. And it's not I don't love it just because of the amount of time I put into this game. I have Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion down here that I need to play through the whole thing. And that was only like $50. $50, 25 scenarios, an hour a scenario. I could play it solo. 25 hours worth of gameplay, maybe a little bit longer. Then that's still going to be a great game. Why? Because of how the game works. This game has one of my favorite mechanics, if not my favorite mechanic of all time in it, in that you use 2 cards each of your turns. And everybody kind of goes at once. So it's a fluid initiative system. If you go really fast, you are going to activate before everybody else. And I mean, the experience of playing through a massive campaign with friends, it's up there. I mean, it really is amazing. That is true, Doctor. Like that is something that is exceedingly special, to be able to play so many hours with a group through a story and everybody be so invested in the game. But I don't think it would have been as interesting had the mechanics not been great. I played through Sword and Sorcery, the base game, and the first expansion, or part of the first expansion, with a buddy. And the Sword and Sorcery isn't on my list because the mechanics aren't as good. You have dice rolling for everything, and you generally are doing kind of the same basic things over and over and over again every turn. With Gloomhaven, with the tactical nature of moving around the board, being able to attack at distances, having to go open doors, everything you're doing there, looting treasures. Yeah, Sword and Sorcery kind of had those, but it was still always more simplistic. Your attacks were more basic. You were always just optimizing how many dice you could get into your hand to roll. Whereas Gloomhaven, your cards determine how well you do in combat. They determine how much damage you can do, for the most part, than just with a modifier flip to see if you add any damage, or maybe add an element to power up somebody else's attacks later on, or your own next turn. And you're optimizing it so that you're not resting too often, you're not losing cards too quickly, because you run out of cards, you're out of the fight. Or your health gets too low, you have to start discarding cards, getting rid of them to stay in the fight, to not take too much damage. And then there's all sorts of status effects. This game has a lot to keep track of, but none of it is difficult once you've played the first handful of scenarios. Now, I know Dr. Glory Hog and I have talked about this game before, because for him, he hasn't had the opportunity to dive into a campaign of Gloomhaven regularly for every other week for, let's say, 2 months. So 4 sessions, 5 sessions every other week. And at that point, you really start to get everything down. If you're doing it more sporadically than that, there's a ton in Gloomhaven. You're not going to be able to remember it all. That's unfortunately the case. Even for Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, the smaller box, it might be easier to get to the table because there's less of it, but the mechanics are still the same. This is a game that has a good amount of thinking to it, but it's all so much fun when you get into those different characters and they each play out differently. But anyways, that's the top 10 of my top 100 games of all time 2021 edition. Let's go back through these really quickly. Number 10, we have Blood Rage, an area control game that is actually more of a drafting and action selection game. We have Cartographers, a roll and write where there's more player interaction and is a fun puzzle to try and figure out. We have Marvel Champions, the Marvel game that feels most like you're playing the Marvel superheroes. That was number 8. Number 7, we have Mansions of Madness. This is an app-assisted game in the Arkham world that Fantasy Flight has created. A ton of fun, just a really good game that changes up so you can even play the same scenarios over again. Then we have a deck building game in Aeon's End. This one is all about working together as a team to defeat some massive nemesis and their minions while making sure they don't destroy your town of Gravehold. Really good deck building, just a lot of fun. I have it separate from Aeon's End Legacy, which is a little bit further down on the list, but both of them are amazing. And if you're interested in trying out Aeon's End as a system, if deck building is something you like and you want to learn how to play it, Aeon's End Legacy is amazing. Then at number 5, we have Lords of Hellas. This is an area control battling game with asymmetric powers and, well, not asymmetric powers, just powers that make you different than everybody else, and a lot going on, but pretty easy to follow once you get into the game. A lot of fun, and it just grows as you play into something bigger. At number 4, we have Detective, a modern crime board game. This is the deduction game that I love the most, where you're trying to solve different cases, and I'm so excited to try some of the standalone expansions like the one for Dune. At number 3, we have Tainted Grail. Tainted Grail is an epic adventure of a game with fun mechanics for combat and diplomacy, but really it's about diving into the story all that you can. At number 2, we have Dice Throne. This is a head-to-head kind of battling game, though it's a battling game, last man standing, to see who will be the strongest. And you can mix and match so many different characters, each of them that play differently. And yeah, it is rolling dice, kind of like you're playing Yahtzee, but it's so much fun. Such a good game. And finally, at number 1, we have the massive game, Gloomhaven. A massive adventure of a game. Well, a medium-sized adventure of a game. A massive dungeon crawler of a game with brilliant mechanics and just an absolutely great time. But with that, we are done with the top 100 games. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching with me. I think that in the weeks leading up to Christmas and the New Year, I'm probably going to play maybe some smaller solo games, maybe get some roll and writes off the shelf, and just kind of have more chance to chat with people about games. And maybe even, I think next week's topic might be going back to your gaming roots, or remembering what drew you to games in the first place. Because I've noticed this, I think, for a lot of people who have been in the hobby for a little while, and I've been in the hobby for a while as well. It's easy to forget about the games that got you here, and to forget that, well, the games that got you here might not be the ones you want to play anymore. They're still really good games for what they are and for getting people into the hobby. But I'll touch on that topic more next week. Probably pulling in some small roll and write game, or Orchard, or I don't think I've played Orchard on stream yet. At least I don't remember no, I don't think I have. So maybe I'll play Orchard on stream, a small little game, and it's a good one to chat through. But with that, thank you everybody so much for watching throughout the top 100, for all the people who have joined me chatting throughout the different videos. It means a lot. I really enjoy talking about board games, and it's always a lot of fun to have people to be able to interact with. There are some links down below to other stuff that I do for the Nerdologist website. If you want to be part of more of these conversations, click that subscribe. And if you enjoyed this content, if you enjoyed this top 100 list, give the video a thumbs up. But with that, I think it's time to watch Hawkeye and Bottoms Up.